Hello, everyone. I see that participants are joining, so I'm going to wait a minute or two before we get started. But you're in the right place for creative coding, how block play develops computational thinking. If anyone wants to say hello in the chat, you're welcome. Oh, I see someone just did. Hello, everyone. Okay, I see the number of participants is kind of holding steady now, so I'm going to assume that most of us are here who are coming. I'm sure we'll have others that join us, but I'll go ahead and get started. I have a lot of slides, a lot of information to share with you today. So I'm excited. Let's get started. So introductions. My name is Ann Gadzikowski, and I'm in the Chicago area as we speak. And I have been a preschool teacher and program director for a long time, more than 30 years. And I'm also an author. I've written a number of books about early childhood education, and I put a couple of them on the screen that are relevant to what we're talking about today. So these publications are from Red Leaf Press, and I wrote a book about robotics and coding. I wrote a book about block play called Young Architects at Play. And then most recently, my most recent book is problem solving. And so you can see these all have kind of a common thread in terms of what we're going to talk about today, which is block play, but in the context of computational thinking and beginning coding. So I'm going to draw on my background in the classroom, and I'm going to draw on these publications and the work that I've done. I am the director of a preschool in Chicago, Families Together Cooperative Preschool on the north side of Chicago. And I just want to mention this because this is a school where play is a priority. It's a foundational value of what we do. And everything I talk about today, even when I get a little bit into the research, I'm going to be talking about the value of play and the priority of play, child-directed, child-initiated play. So that's going to be a common thread in everything that we talk about today. A lot of the specific activities that I'm going to share with you are from my experience. For 8 years, I was a program coordinator for a program called Leapfrog here in the Chicago area through Northwestern University. And these were STEM enrichment programs for young children starting in preschool. And we had a lot of architecture and engineering courses. We had a lot of coding and robotics courses. The program is still exists at Northwestern, and I did that work for 8 years. So I'm going to draw on that as well. So coding, you know, when I was invited to do this workshop, the word coding was at the top of the request. And I think many of us, I know that I was initially very skeptical about whether coding belongs in an early childhood classroom, computer programming. So I'm curious in the chat, like, what do you think? Does coding belong in early childhood classrooms? I'm not gonna wait for an answer because I'm gonna break that down a little bit and we can keep thinking and talking about it. So when you think about computer programming, like sitting down at a screen and learning how to write a program, well, maybe that belongs in an early childhood classroom. It depends, right? It depends on whether you're using an app or you're using a program that's really made for young children. But if you broaden that beyond the computer itself and you're thinking about computational thinking, then probably that does belong in the early childhood classroom. Depends on whether you're doing it in a developmentally appropriate way. And I'm going to define computational thinking and looking at examples of that today. And you may be surprised to learn that you're already doing a lot of computational thinking in the classroom. But when we take a step back even further and we look at one of the foundational materials of an early childhood classroom, blocks, do blocks belong in a preschool or early childhood classroom? Then yes, absolutely. So I always bring it back to blocks, and we're actually going to start with blocks. So think about your own childhood. Did you play with blocks when you were little? Again, you can pop that into the chat if you want. I have a picture on the screen of some vintage blocks, the play school blocks that, not this exact set, but I had a set like this that I played with when I was little, and maybe some of you from my generation would remember that. I also had, in my family, we had a large set of wooden unit blocks, but those blocks belonged to my brothers. I have two older brothers, and I always knew that those were the boys' blocks. So I think that today what I see when I observe in early childhood programs is that the block area is much more inclusive than it used to be when I was a little girl. I hope that all the children in your classrooms feel welcome in the block corner. But all of these ideas that we're going to share today are with the spirit of welcoming and inclusion in the block area, that everybody should feel included and be encouraged in terms of STEM learning. So what we're going to talk about today, the importance of block play. We'll start with blocks. We're going to define computational thinking and talk about what that is in an early childhood classroom. We talk a little bit about coding, and then we're going to put all the pieces together. How do block play and coding fit together? And if we have time at the end, I'm going to share some additional recommended resources. But I did create a handout that lists the links for the books and the materials and the apps that I'm going to talk about today. So hopefully you have access to that on your platform. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's get going. So the importance of block play, you know, there are some researchers like Dr. Dimitri Christakis at the Center of Child Health who are studying the impact of screen time on young children. And Dr. Christakis has written very persuasively about the idea that it's not so much how many hours or minutes of screen time that we should be concerned about. It's what they're doing on the screens, of course, but also what are they missing? If a child is spending time on a tablet, what are they not doing? And Dr. Christakis has raised block play as one of those active types of play that is potentially getting displaced by screen time. So this is something we really need to be paying attention to. And why? Why is block play so important? I always like to take a look back for a minute or two at the history of blocks and how they became such an important part of our classrooms. You know, probably children have been building with sticks and bricks and stones since the history of children, right? But if you look back at the history of early childhood education, we can thank Frederick Froebel for introducing blocks as learning tools. So he was the so-called father of kindergarten. You might have heard of him before. The 1800s, he started a kindergarten, a school for young children in Germany. And he developed a set of blocks that he called gifts. And each gift was self-contained set of blocks, and you can see one on the screen. You can buy these today. They're still around. And the first gift was a very simple set of cubes. The second gift had some bricks, and then they became more and more complex. And you can see that the sixth gift here. And the pieces fit together in really interesting and mathematical ways. So Froebel gifts were kind of the initial educational tool in the classroom. And the famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, said that he had played with these blocks when he was a child. And he would say that these blocks are still in my hands today. Because what happens when children play with these kinds of blocks that are created with math in mind is that even if they don't have words for what they're doing, and even if the teacher is not directly facilitating what they're doing, they are learning with their hands. This is true, you know, constructivist learning. They are learning kinesthetically and tangibly these concepts of how shapes fit together. And that's built in, you know, to the blocks. And then Carolyn Pratt, about 100 years ago, an American educator in New York and also a woodworker, decided that we needed blocks that were like Froebel blocks, had that math built in, but were big enough that children could play together with the blocks and play on the floor or on a table. And she worked out through trial and error, a bunch of different types of wood, bunch of different shapes and sizes. She worked out what we now today call the unit block. And if you order a set of unit blocks from any early childhood or school supply company, they're all going to be the same size. They should be the same size. So 5.5 inches long, 2.75 inches wide, 1.375 inches thick. And the beauty of that math is the proportion, is the ratio. So there's a 4:2:1 ratio. So the thickness, 4 of those will equal 1 length, right? And with the width, 2 of those will equal 1 length. So there's beautiful math that's built in to these tools. So they're a system. We would call this a system, that there's the unit block. So there's the half unit, there's the quarter unit, there's a double unit. And then some of the shapes are divided as triangles, triangular prisms. So they fit together beautifully. So unit blocks are a system, and this is going to fit into what we're talking about today in terms of computational thinking. Even if you don't say anything to the children, even if it's completely free play, the children are developing this computational thinking through their experience with the unit block system. And if you don't have unit blocks, there are other manipulatives and construction materials that are systems. For example, you see on the screen, so Legos are a system. Now, not every Lego piece is going to have that beautiful math built in, especially some of those fancier, more expensive sets where they might have unusual pieces. But if you use Legos or Duplos in your classroom, get yourself a bunch of those basic bricks and a bunch of the half bricks, and you're on your way for having a system. And there are other materials too. Some magnetile sets are in similar proportions, not all of them. And interestingly, that play school colored block set that I showed you that I played with as a child, that's not a really very good system. There are some oddball blocks that are part of that system that don't really fit together. So look for systems when you're looking for materials for your children to play with and to build with. You want things that have that beautiful math already built in. So I also want to encourage you to think about what other materials you add to the blocks. We can expand the value of block play when we add other materials. And in the picture I'm showing you on the screen, this is from one of the Leapfrog courses that we developed when I was at Northwestern. It was called Blocks and Blueprints. And for a whole week, the children came for a half-day class for a whole week. We would draw and then build what we drew, or we would build and then we would draw what we had built. So there was this relationship between drawing and building and sketching. And in the picture, we have one of these big pieces of graph paper, which you can buy from a specialty school supply company. They're a little bit hard to find. And I think these are 2 pieces that are put together. So the children built a floor plan for a building, and then they traced it. And then when you remove the blocks, you have your pattern, and you can build it again because now you have a pattern. So we did that. We also projected shadows of the buildings onto the wall and traced along on a big piece of paper there, or we simply sketched what we had drawn or what we planned to draw. And so when children go back and forth between a 2-dimensional image and a 3-dimensional structure, their learning is just going to naturally deepen because they're going to notice things and think about things and maybe measure things that they wouldn't have otherwise. So simply inviting children to create a picture of what they made is a really wonderful way to expand their understanding and their thinking and the complexity of their thinking and the creativity of their thinking. And this back and forth between different materials and for me, it's very much connected to my admiration of the schools of Reggio Emilia, Italy. And maybe some of you are already very familiar with the schools of Reggio Emilia. I did put a link, I think I put 2 links for more information. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but there's a concept among Reggio Emilia educators called the 100 Languages of Children. And it's really a beautiful concept that expresses all the different ways that children communicate and explore and represent what they're thinking and what they want to learn and what they're learning. And the example on your screen, again, it's a drawing of moving figures, and then there's wire and there's clay that they're representing the moving figures, or maybe they would move their own bodies, because certainly dance and movement is another language. All these different ways that children have of representing who they are and what they know is very important. So that fits in with block play too, because block play is a language. That's another language. So it's all really important. So what I'm going to talk about shortly is connecting the experiences of learning on a screen, virtual experiences, with the tangible learning and the blocks. And I'm not going to tell you too much about these pictures. I'm going to explain that later. But the whole idea here is we're going to eventually make a leap from block play to coding, because we're going to move eventually from one medium to another medium. So stay tuned. Let's just check in for a minute. I know I've been talking really fast. So far the takeaways are block play is super important. Look for blocks and materials that are part of a system, mathematical system. And you can combine blocks with other materials or languages to expand learning. All right, so now I did say that we were going to talk about computational thinking today. So let's think about thinking. Patterns, I bet you already knew that patterns and learning to recognize patterns, learning to make patterns, that's an important part of computational thinking that is developmentally appropriate for young children. Children are capable and interested in finding patterns. The image on your screen is a pattern I created and took a photo of for my problem-solving book. So we've got two attributes here. We've got the type of animal and we have the size of animal. So we have a big tiger and a little tiger, we have a big elephant and a little elephant, we have a big lion. What comes next? So I bet you do activities like this already in your classroom. So patterns are an important part of computational thinking. Sequencing, learning what comes first, what comes second, what comes next. You're already doing this. I bet you know this book. There's a page here on the screen from Knuffle Bunny by Mo Willems. Trixie and her daddy went down the block. If you know the story, you know that there's a sequence. Trixie and her dad go to the laundromat. They have certain landmarks that they pass through to get to the laundromat. They come home again. Knuffle Bunny is missing. They have to go back again. So there's this sequence that they're following in one order and then back again. And so every time you read that story, you're promoting computational thinking. And you could make that even more fun and interesting by actually building with blocks. You could build Trixie's street. You could build their home and you could build their laundromat. I bet you're doing stuff like that already. So that's computational thinking. In terms of like definition, I should give you a definition of computational thinking. It's the ability to organize a problem so that it can be represented by logical steps. And if you were a teacher of middle school, high school students, you're going to have a more complicated definition of computational thinking. But for our purposes in early childhood, solving problems is really where it's at. The ability to organize a problem, that's what computational thinking is. And you might think from the word computational that you have to have a computer to do this. No, a computer is not required, but the type of logic and the type of patterns and sequences and those kinds of things, that's going to help. That's going to help you understand computers and computer programming, but you don't have to have a computer to teach computational thinking. So solving a problem, the ability to organize and solve a problem, you're going to encounter beautiful problems every single day of your life. And you're always going to have problems to solve in your classroom. It's a beautiful thing. Problems are a never-ending resource in your classroom. So for example, you've got the children's boots or shoes lined up and some busy, fast-moving friends come through and mess everything up and all the boots and all the shoes are all mixed up. So how would you solve that problem? I love turning that question back to the children. Not like, what are you going to do about that? But just like, how can we solve this problem? What can we do? And so they'll come up with all different kinds of ideas. Maybe each person would find their own shoes, or maybe you'd sort them by color, or maybe you'd start with the red one and then you'd find the other red one. They're all different kinds of ways that children can be involved in organizing a problem. And that's computational thinking. I love the problems that come up spontaneously during block play. And this photo represents something that probably happens a lot, is if a child is building a structure for an animal or for a little person and things don't quite fit together the way that they thought they would. This giraffe, I'm sure, loves his new house, but the size of it is probably not quite right. So how can you rebuild the house? How can you fix the house so that the giraffe will be able to fit inside? And children solve these problems all the time, with and without our facilitation. There are certain kinds of problems that will come up in your classroom that you can actually create for children. And that's another wonderful opportunity to promote computational thinking. And the example I have on the screen is like a three-dimensional maze that I created for children to solve. So you've got your little bear who lives in the yellow house, and you've got the red house where the bear is traveling to. So how can the bear get from one place to another? How can the bear travel from the yellow house to the red house? So children are going to solve this in different ways, and they can solve it by showing you. Certainly they can lift up the little bear toy, and maybe one child will have the bear jump over the river, or maybe one child would have the bear climb the mountains and go through the forest of flowers. There are different paths that you can take. The real challenge in early childhood would be for a child not just to show you, but to tell you. And then you're using some really interesting vocabulary: over, under, around, and you're having to hold it in your head in a way that can be very challenging for young children. There are some funny videos actually along those same lines. Maybe you've seen some of those before. The Exact Instructions Challenge, and I have a screenshot here, and I think I put a link in your handout. There's a dad who has done exact instructions challenges with his children and then put the videos on YouTube. And so the challenge was, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And of course, the first time a child encounters this kind of challenge, they might not give enough detail, right? So the child might say, well, you take the bread and you put the jelly on it. And so the dad takes the bread and he takes the whole jar of jelly and he just like sets it on top. And then the child says, no, you have to open up the jar of jelly. You have to spread it. So these kinds of exact instructions challenges, even if you're not doing exactly that method in your classroom, the idea that when we challenge children to break things down into steps, to articulate and understand what a sequence is, those are wonderful examples of computational thinking. And what that is, okay, coming back to coding and computer programming, a set of instructions is an algorithm. So we are introducing children to the concept of an algorithm, even if we're not using that word. I don't usually use the word algorithm with really young children. We're creating something that will become what you see on one side of the screen, an algorithm, but we are creating a set of instructions. So I hope you're beginning to see in these examples I'm sharing with you that we are building a foundation of understanding that could at some point lead to more sophisticated coding and computer programming skills. But we don't have to start that in early childhood. There are lots of really developmentally appropriate ways that we're building that foundation in early childhood. So the takeaways from this part of our conversation: computational thinking is about solving problems. Patterns and sequences are important. Those are the developmentally appropriate pieces of it that make sense for really young children. And an algorithm is a set of instructions. So learning about instructions is setting that foundation for later learning. All right, so in case you did come to this session really interested in the idea of coding and how young children can learn to code, I'm going to address that now. Now, we are not talking about learning Java or learning Python or any of these, really complex languages like the one that you see on your screen. I am not a computer programmer. I don't know what this says, but we can think about what is code, and we can simplify these concepts so that they make sense for younger children. So there is an organization called K12CS computerscience.org. They have some wonderful materials starting with preschool and kindergarten, and they simply define code as any set of instructions expressed in a programming language. And the example I have here is what we call block code. This is a more complex block code. This has text, and it's a little bit, it's I still don't get it. Still don't understand what's on the screen, but you can see that there's some colors, there's some patterns. You kind of get a sense that there's a sequence. You start to get a little bit more accessible when we're thinking about code, and we're calling it block code. If you are interested in some introductory coding experiences for yourself, like if you're going to be doing any of this work with children, you want to kind of get it, at least be a step or two ahead of them, I highly recommend code.org. It's a free educational resource for teachers and for parents and for children. And take one of their coding tutorials, start at kindergarten, and do one of their coding exercises. They have so many now. Some of the tutorials are called Hour of Code because code.org began, I think it was almost 10 years ago now, as an initiative to get people to just try coding. And they had this initiative once a year called Hour of Code. But now there are so many resources available and really interesting curriculum materials for teachers to use at code.org. So try one of the really simple coding exercises for yourself, and you might really enjoy it. And you'll be more confident that when you're talking about coding and programming, that you understand yourself what we're talking about. But you probably know more about coding than you think. So one of the things that I learned is that a loop is a really important foundational command in pretty much any programming language. And what you see on your screen is a piece of block code that represents a loop command, and you can see the number 4. So this is, if there was something that you wanted to happen 4 times, you would use this piece of block code. But how many of you are familiar with the classic children's book, Millions of Cats? So there's actually looping built into that story. If you know this story well, you probably already have it in your head. So there are a number of points in the story where this phrase repeats. Cats here, cats there, cats and kittens everywhere, hundreds of cats, thousands of cats, millions and billions and trillions of cats. And that keeps coming back, right? So it's a loop. It's like a refrain. Like if you know music, you know that there's a chorus or there's a refrain that comes back again and again. So looping is a concept that you're probably already familiar with. Another core command in computer programming is conditions, or if-then conditions. And I'm showing you a screen from the app Daisy the Dinosaur because there are a couple of opportunities in this very beginning coding app to try a condition. So if you tap on the screen, Daisy will jump. Or if you actually, the iPad, you can shake it a little bit and Daisy will jump or turn or run. So if then conditions. Well, that reminds me of another classic children's story, The Runaway Bunny, which the whole story is conditions, right? Like the little bunny wants to run away from the mom and says, well, I'm going to run away from you. I'm going to become a fish in a stream. And then the mom says, well, if you become a fish in the stream, then I will become a fisherman and I will catch you in my net. So the whole book is if-then conditions. So you already know a lot about commands. That's my point, is that there are all these parallels with storytelling and with the kinds of play and teaching that you're already doing. I do recommend one programming language as a beginning programming language for young children. It's called Scratch Junior. And it is a programming language that uses block code. And it's funny, we're talking about blocks. Well, they do actually look like blocks on the screen when you're using block code. And Scratch Junior is so wonderful because it's primarily icon based, which means there are little pictures. You don't have to be able to read. There are some words you'll see, but the icons are so simple and straightforward that even without reading the words, you can kind of intuit what the block code means. Like, what do you think a green flag means? Probably means to start, green for go. And then the light blue blocks of block code are all movement blocks, so moving to the right or jumping. We've got one with a little dialogue bubble that must be a way to add words or to add speech. You've got a little figure that's getting smaller and getting bigger. That's if you want something to get smaller or bigger. The green pop is for adding sound. So even before we're looking at this app, I hope you have a sense of like, oh yeah, we can figure this out. I can figure this out. My kids could probably figure this out. So this is what it looks like. This is what Scratch Junior looks like. And Scratch Junior is a free app. And you could do it on a phone, but you probably would want a tablet so that you have a little bit of larger work surface. And just look at this for a minute. If you haven't seen Scratch Junior before, I bet you can kind of intuit sort of how this works. So you pick a background. In this case, there's a farm. It comes with a character, the Scratch Junior Scratch Cat, who's already available to you, but you could add other characters. There are even features where you can draw or take a photo, and you could use that for a character or background. So in Scratch Junior, you could take a picture of yourself and you could put yourself in there. You could take a picture of your classroom and your classroom could be the background. You could actually create a little animation of yourself or of a child in your class using Scratch Junior. So how do you make something happen? So you've got your background, you've got your characters on there. So that's where you use the code, and that's where the programming comes in. And this white area along the bottom is your desktop, and that's where you're going to assemble your code. And you're going to do it on the touch screen by touching and moving, sliding things down. And you're going to just create a little row. You're going to create a sequence of commands. And when you touch the green, that means go. And so you can see there's some motion commands there to the right of the green flag down on the desktop to move, to jump. The cat is going to do those things once you hit green. And I don't have a video of it built into my presentation today, but I encourage you to go take a look. So if you are interested in introducing some beginning coding to young children, Scratch Junior is a wonderful way to do it. All right, so takeaways at this point: learning to code requires identifying patterns and solving problems, which you're already doing in your classroom. And Scratch Junior is a free app that teaches coding to young children. And what you see on the screen is Scratch Junior has a partnership with PBS Kids, and you can use the characters from PBS Kids TV shows as the characters in Scratch Junior. So that's another kind of cool thing about Scratch Junior. All right, so let's start to put the pieces together and see how I'm doing on time. Okay, good, we're doing all right. All right, so how do block play and coding fit together? So here's just a little bit of theory, just to give you the background so you understand how this all kind of fits together with educational philosophy. So you've probably heard of Jean Piaget, the idea of the constructivist approach, where children are creating their own knowledge through their direct experiences. And of course, we know from Vygotsky that these are direct experiences, not just with things, but with people. So this is through play, through your experiences with play in the classroom. Children are developing knowledge. And there was a computer scientist named Seymour Papert at MIT, and actually the Scratch programming language sort of grew out of Seymour Pappert's work at MIT. And he was one of the first people who said, let's pay attention to how children learn. And as we're developing programming languages and as we're developing robotics and other technologies, let's make sure that they make sense for young children, how young children learn. And so his terminology was constructionist learning. So Piaget is the constructivist and Papert is the constructionist. And he developed a programming language that was one of the first kind of block programming languages, developed some of the initial robotics kits that Lego Mindstorms, robotics kits, those are all come out of the work of Seymour Papert in the 70s and the 80s and 90s when people were just starting to think about all this. And now we see it everywhere. So when I was at Northwestern in the Leapfrog program, one of the things we did is we used an app called Daisy the Dinosaur to teach preschool, kindergarten, and I think first graders as well use Daisy. It's a very simple introductory learning how to code. And the thing I didn't like about Daisy the Dinosaur is that it has you can see the little blocks, little blue and pink blocks there. They have text on them. You have to read them. But what was really interesting was that we had a lot of children who were not readers yet, and they learned to use Daisy the Dinosaur either through trial and error or because they were starting to identify the first letter in each of those words. So they knew that the N was for move, or they knew that the T was for turn. So it was really interesting to see how that was actually a nice early literacy exercise for them. So we in small groups, we didn't have the whole class doing this. We didn't have enough tablets for that. But in groups of 4 or 5, sometimes 6 children, we would work with children to teach them for short periods of time. We didn't do this all day long. We teach them how to code using a simple app like Daisy the Dinosaur. And then we had some researchers from Northwestern, because we were, part of the university, who were really interested in what we were doing. And they did a research project where they looked at how children were playing with unit blocks after they had this direct experience with coding. So we took the commands from Daisy and we put them actually on the blocks. You can see that there's masking tape there, and we wrote the words from Daisy. And then the researchers studied to see, what happened. What was the relationship between the virtual experience with Daisy the Dinosaur and the blocks? And this is just a screen here that shows you a little bit about Daisy. So what the researchers did, they didn't sit in the classroom the whole time because this was all summer long, is they had a camera on a pedestal and they just let it run. And we had groups kind of rotating through the block area. And so I'm going to show you a little clip from one of those. There's no audio. You don't really need to see the audio. But I think what's interesting is to see what happened for children who had used the Daisy the Dinosaur app and then immediately afterwards went to play with unit blocks on the floor. And we also gave them plastic dinosaurs as well. So they're sort of encouraged to recreate what they saw. So let me just show you. It's a short clip. And it's not a high quality video because, as I said, it was just a camera sitting on a pedestal. So we've got, kids playing with dinosaurs just the way anybody would play with dinosaurs. But this child in the center who has his back to us, he is creating a sequence. He's got these blocks lined up. They turn a corner, actually. So he's doing it a little bit more creatively than just putting a line across the screen. And now he's taking his orange dinosaur and he's following the commands. There's a jump command. There's a turn command. So as the dinosaur is physically traveling along, he's following the commands in a way that's very similar to what they did on the screen. And I just want to connect this back to what I said before about the 100 languages of children, that every time a child is invited to expand or rethink what they're already doing in one medium, like blocks, into another medium, like drawing or like coding, then their learning becomes so much deeper. And I think it's a really wonderful solution to the concern or the question of screen time. Like, oh, screen time, children, they just have screens all the time. If we look at ways that we can take what children are doing on the screen and take it out, then make it a tangible experience, make it a social experience. Because that was the other thing, when children played with blocks, they were playing together and they were having conversations. When they were doing Daisy on the screen, they were talking a little bit to each other, but there wasn't as much social interaction and they weren't solving problems together. They were each doing their own thing. But in the block area, they're doing it together and they're collaborating and they're talking and they're figuring things out. So that was really wonderful to see. This was another example. This was an outlier. This child was just an amazing child, but I just had to share it with you. This was one of our coding classes, and this happened spontaneously. So this child was working with the straws and connectors, and he built this really cool structure that was like a 3-dimensional plus sign. And the other kids got really excited about it, and they said, that's really cool. We want to do that too. How did you do that? So they're asking for an algorithm, right? They're saying, how did you do that? What are the instructions that you did that? And he took these colored blocks and these little scraps of paper, and he made instructions for them. Now, admittedly, the instructions ended up being too complex and the children just sort of watched what he did and then did it. But the fact that he went through that process and tried to show them through the color of the block, and then you can't really see, but there are like numbers on there. And the numbers represent either the number of pieces you need or the order in which you put it. Now, this was a super bright kid, and not every child is going to be able to create their own algorithm just out of the blue. But I share it with you because when you open up the possibility, when you say, here are some interesting materials that you can use, and here's a coding app that you can play with, and you can try this and you can try that, children begin to combine things in really interesting ways. And that was just a very exciting moment in this classroom for this teacher and for these children. All right, so you probably know kids who like to play with world building games like Minecraft, like older kids. For younger kids, there are some similar apps that are a little bit more appropriate for younger children. Like I used to really like Toka Builder, and when I say used to, this was a couple years ago, and Toka Builder is now part of Toka World. So if you know anything about the Toka apps, but the idea is that children love to build things in virtual worlds. So we can take advantage of that and make that connection to building things in the real world. So one of the things we did in the Leapfrog classrooms is that when a child was using a Toka Builder app or an app that actually had virtual blocks in it, we would be sure to have blocks of the same or similar shape that they could build with. So we had kids who would spend a little time building something with Toka Builder, and then they were invited to build it or something similar to it using the cube blocks. And Minecraft, of course, is all cubes. So in addition to the unit blocks, if you have an opportunity to have cube blocks available to young children, because their virtual experiences often are so visually tied in with cubes, then I think cubes can be a really interesting material for children. They're not a system like I was just describing, they're just cubes. But a lot of children really get excited about cubes because they feel like they're doing something cool like Minecraft. So cubes are a great way to connect. So robotics. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about robotics, and I know I don't have a lot of time left. But if you are really interested in coding and computational thinking as it's related to sequences and patterns, if you are able to get your hands on one of these educational robots, that would be really fun in your classroom. So the Bebot robot is a classic example. You don't need a computer. You don't need a tablet. There is an app if you wanted to, but you don't have to. This is what we call tangible tech, physically tangible tech. You don't have to use a screen. The children are programming the robot by pressing the buttons on the back. Go forward, go back, go side to side. The other one on your screen here is the Primo Cubetto robot, which has this pegboard, and the green peg means go. and the yellow peg means turn left, and the blue peg means turn right. So you've got these pegs, these physical blocks that the children are putting into sequence. And then when you hit start, the little robot will move. So these kinds of educational robots are really wonderful if you want to explore coding and sequencing in your classrooms. And I have another little clip from one of the Leapfrog classes. And what I love about this is that not only did these children program these Bebot robots to move, but they came together as a fun little group, and they were actually programming themselves to move like the Bebots. So let me show you this one. So they're turning, they're going backwards. So this is a sequence. This is an algorithm. And the children are following along. And there's some really interesting spatial reasoning going on here. Like they're not only moving in the same direction, but they're orienting their bodies in the same direction that the Bebots are. You can see one child kind of went the other way. So, so these Bebot robots are really wonderful tools as well. And you don't have to have a Bebot robot to follow some of these same activities. You can do it with just your own body, navigating a grid and creating instructions for navigating a grid. So in the picture on the left, we have just regular masking tape where you create a grid, and the children are using arrows to program each other to move through the grid. And then on the picture on the right, we do have the Bebot robots there, but the children have created their own map, and they are programming the robots to move across the map. Oh my gosh, I only have 3 more minutes left. What else did I have here? Okay, I think for the rest of my session, I'm just sharing a few more resources, and I've got just a couple takeaways. So there are plenty of other robotic devices, some more expensive or less expensive. There's the Fisher-Price Codapillar. There's the Code and Go robot mouse, very similar to the Bebot, smaller. It doesn't have a rechargeable battery, though. You have to buy batteries for it. The Primo Cubetto I mentioned to you. The Primo Cubetto is more expensive, but it has some built-in features for children with special needs. So it's got these interesting notches built into it so that children with low vision or impaired vision can hold the pieces and sort them. And it's just a really beautifully designed toy or robot. If you need help choosing apps, I recommend Common Sense Media as a way of sort of vetting which apps are developmentally appropriate. They've got great reviews, and they have a section on their website, both for parents and for educators. And so that my last set of takeaways is that block play and coding fit together in many different ways. And it's important to make meaningful connections between the tangible and the virtual, and choose your tech tools wisely. Active creative play is the priority. So those are my takeaways, my full takeaways. And I've got 2 more minutes. I had a couple more, I wasn't sure how much time I would have. I have a couple more resources that I'll just go through in the 2 minutes we have left. There's a free app called Lightbot, and it's a little bit more complicated in terms of the coding, but it has these 3-dimensional images with the different levels and layers that lends itself really well to block play. So if you have a chance to look at Lightbot, I like to combine Lightbot with block play. There's a coding board game that teaches robotic programming, but it's just a cardboard board game. So Robot Turtles is a pretty fun game, and it's recommended for ages 4 and up. So I recommend that board game. If you can't afford any of these nice educational robots in your classroom, there are toys like Hexbug toys. The little nanos are very inexpensive, and you can't program them. You know, they just do what they do when you turn them on. But you can build block structures for the Hexbug. So you could build a path for your Hexbug. You could build a house for your Hexbug, and so that's another way. Let's see. Oh, and if you are really seriously interested in robotics and maybe you work with some older children or some after school programs, the Lego robot systems, it used to be just the We Do and the Mindstorm, and now they have a new generation of robotic kits for educators. And the new one is called Spike. And you probably have heard of, like, at the high school level, these Lego robotics competitions, and it's a whole world out there of Lego robots. So so look that up if you're curious about it. All right, so I see my time is up. So I'm going to go ahead and end the, let's see, it says leave meeting. All right, well, thank you all. I really enjoyed this and I hope it was helpful to you. And I'm going to see if I can figure out how to end. I think it says leave meeting, so I'm just going to do that. So, all right, take care. Bye.